And we are live. You almost got a double bra there, but I just managed to save us. Greetings and salutations, beautiful beings, and welcome, George. How are you doing?
Good, good. It's a good day here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too because we are talking about convention play. We are talking about organized play. It's summer. It's the season of conventions. It's all happening. And George is experienced in both organized play and convention play. So I thought he would be the perfect person to come and tell us how he got into it, give us the tips and tricks, tell us about running convention games, how they're different to regular games, all that kind of jazz. And of course, folks at home, I want you to be asking questions too. We run these streams right now and podcasts for those in the future precisely so that you can come and ask questions. So make sure you ask those questions. That is what this is all about. And just before we get going, let me introduce George properly because he is far too modest to do it himself. George Sanders, also known as Sam Surratt, runs organized play tabletop role-playing games for Boulderman Games and Kobold Press. We love Kobold Press. In classic TTRPG fashion, he is also the innkeeper at the Red Lion Bed and Breakfast. His background as a technological consultant has helped him to adapt to the surge in vital gaming, and games with George are a great chance to build memorable characters and roleplay. There'll be plenty of battle and action, and he won't shy away from every corner you want to explore. He'll draw out the epic in your characters and give you a great gaming experience. And that's why he's here, because he's good at this, guys. He does it for his job. We're not taking care of guests or running games. George is world-building, writing, and gardening. And you can learn more about his writing on World Anvil at anholt.com. Yeah? He's super cool. All right. Just as we get in, George, just tell us a tiny bit about what we can find at anholt.com, because that's your World Anvil world, correct?
Right. So Anholt is a forest, high fantasy setting. A lot of the typical things you'd see, but I wanted to. I think with the pandemic and everything going on, I needed to write something that was a kind of positive and process all the experiences I was doing, and that's what came out. So it's still coming out. The first year, I really need a World Anvil because I put down 120,000 words.
Wow.
And I've been doing about 80,000 each year since. So, and all that started with a game that a couple friends, we actually, about a month before the pandemic, we were talking about playing. And then when it hit, we were like, oh, we got to do this. So once a week we were playing, and my pages and notes just started filling up. And so that's when I found World Anvil. And interesting, at the same time, I started learning a little bit more about writing and everything else. So I just, took off from there.
Amazing. Well, folks, you can find George's World over at anholt.com. But I think it's time to get on because I have so many questions for George, and folks, I'm sure you do too. So let's kick off with one which may be obvious to some and less obvious to others. What is the difference between organized play and convention play when we're talking about RPGs?
Yeah, and it's interesting because they overlap a lot, but they're two different things. Organized play lets you take a character between different tables. You may not even be playing with the same group of people at different tables. It may be 6 months between the times you play one time and the next time. But organized play allows you a way to take a character through a storyline or through a series of one-shot adventures and level up and kind of make that own character your story with that character. So if you don't have time for a long campaign or your schedule's too sporadic, you can jump in on organized play games at your local gaming stores, at conventions, or even virtual games, which is what I do a lot online. And so it goes back, you can go back and forth. So you often level up each session or every few sessions, and it's all self-contained in that session. So the next time you come back, even if you're in a totally different place, everybody starts at the same spot, stops at the same spot, and you can tell your character story. That with convention play, of course, it's at events and that type of thing, and that's why the organized play works well at conventions, because somebody can come in and you can pick up, wherever your character's at. If you played Gen Con last year, your Tabaxi Druid was there, and causing all kinds of chaos as cats do. And you come back the following year, you can just play as that tabaxi and continue on through new adventures people have written. And it just allows you a chance to tell your own story too as a player. With conventional,
Amazing.
of course, it might be just playing at an event, which is fun in itself with all the people around you doing it.
Amazing. Do they both tend to be one shots though? That's what we were looking at here, right?
Yeah, it does tend to be because you have a limited amount of time, and particularly with convention play, your slot, you're going in, you're in line, you're getting assigned to a table, and you don't know where you're going to go, who you're going to play with. But as intimidating as that sounds, when you sit down at the table, the GM or the dungeon master is going to go over everything with you, kind of like get everybody settled, and the nice thing about convention play, and this is with a lot of these one-shot games, you can make the assumption that your characters knows the other characters, and that's a lot of times a GM will say this up front, and no matter what outlook your character has, whether you're chaotic neutral or whether you're lawful good or whatever, you're committed to this group, and that makes it real easy to kind of start. And there's tricks that you can do with that your character introductions, and you weave stories. Somebody says something, and I often try to encourage other people to tie into that, and we just kind of go around the table, and from there it's that's like breaking the ice, and everybody kind of dives into it from that point.
Really cool. So we've talked about the fact these are almost always one shots. Are there any particular kinds of games that work best at a convention, particular systems or particular sort of conceits, particular kinds of story arcs that work better than others at a convention or play?
There's often the 3-scene process going on. There's also heists that work well. Mysteries work well. Because you're spending a certain amount of time investigating, and then there's the incident, so you do tend to have a series of 5 or 6 types of games that end up working. Chases can work, which is sometimes tricky to pull off, but because you have a limited amount of time and you've got to get to this endpoint, chases actually work a little bit easier in one shot sometimes than they do in long-term games.
Oh, cool. That's a really, really good tip. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take us through a little bit of an arc now. When I think about RPGs, I always think about the prep, the running, and what happens after the game. So that's how we're going to approach this topic now.
Okay.
So we're going to paint you a picture, guys, of the experience of running convention or organized play. Let's start with, we've talked about the different kinds of games. So that feeds a little bit into what the GM is preparing. How do you prepare your players for convention or organized play game? Typically, what kind of access do you get to them, and what kind of information do you tend to provide them with before the game has even started?
At a convention in person, there's minimal pre-game access, but you take a few minutes to talk to everybody. Common questions are how long have you been playing? What's your favorite class? That type of thing. Kind of get them started, get them to talk about their character, because the things that they say will tell you how experienced they are. Yeah. And you can real quick map that out. And the nice thing too, when you're playing with somebody that's experienced, they like to play and they like new players, right? So if you're a GM, you identify those experienced players because they will often help the new players too. And you can lean into that a little bit with how you start describing the game, and then that makes them just magnify it from there. So you can kind of play off each other that way.
Oh, that's really, really, really good idea. So almost sort of deputizing a little bit, spotting the ones in advance who are going to be helping the others. Right.
So in person, especially at conventions when you're just meeting everybody at that moment, that's important. With virtual games, this is the things I like about virtual games, is that you often have a week or a couple days to actually talk with them over Discord or chat, and So having warm-up questions is a big thing to have prepared. And I try to adjust them so that they're different for each game. It only takes a few minutes of brainstorming, and you can usually come up with something that relates to the topic without giving away the big details. And then everybody's like, oh, this is why you asked that question at the end.
What would be an example of a warm-up question you've asked in the past?
Give me an item that you forgot when you left camp.
Oh, I like that. Very nice.
Yeah. And that's from that one in particular is a good one. But that one's from Justice Armin. He did a blog post a couple years ago, and I bookmarked it because it was 100 things to ask your characters your players. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what I need. So
amazing. I love that. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, and over time you just keep coming up with more. And like I said, the really way to make that work is to tie it into the story you're coming into.
Nice. Yeah. Nice, really nice. Okay, so sometimes you get to talk to them in advance, particularly online. Sometimes it's literally, well, hello, I signed up for your game. I guess this is my chair.
Yeah.
Particularly in person. What kind of handouts do you prepare? Like player-facing materials, physical things, maybe online things. What do you prepare for either a physical or a digital convention game or organized play game? What do you find is helpful for you, for the players?
Right. So for me, what kind of handouts do I? Okay, player-facing things. Okay. There are things like if there's something important in the game or a name, right? That needs to be a piece of paper you hand to them or a handout in your VTT. Something, and it should be public once you reveal it, because you're hurrying through a lot of lore or information in this one shot, and if you put that up, they'll remember it and play with it. If you don't put it up, everybody's trying to remember the name instead of thinking about role playing. So names are an important thing to, like, in a quick description, having a handout ready to just hit show players. So as soon as you say the name, you could just hit the button and it's there. Maps are useful, of course, like especially if you're going on a trip or a broad area. And again, the same type of thing, leaving it accessible to people so they can look at it or review it. If you're doing a heist, that's a fun thing where you can, like, on a VTT, I would actually set up a page that is just heist planning. Like take a image of a background of a table and put all kinds of stuff on it. If it's a cyberpunk one, you put all kinds of materials on there that's modern and a picture of a laptop or something. And if it's fantasy, you put the ale cups on there and some coins and a dagger, and you're good to go. And then put the game map or like the area map on the middle of that table. So like you can then you can go over everything and kind of set the stage for everybody.
I love that. So it's a little bit information delivery, but it's a little bit like mood and theme delivery as well.
Right.
That's
and then it gets everybody thinking, oh, this is the planning stage. And because doors and planning are problems. So you need to set the window. If you only have half an hour for planning, you put this table up. You if you're in person, you move everything out of the way and you put the map down. Everybody knows they're in planning mode, and then you move the map. Right? You take it off. You take it away when they're done, or when it's time to move on. Because you got to keep your beats going when it's a limited time frame, and you know that you only have half an hour for planning. So if that's all they come up with, you're forcing them to improv a little bit. Like, oh, okay, time to go.
I love that. Because essentially you're time zoning with physical props. That's very clever.
Yeah,
that's really cunning. Okay, here's an interesting question. How do you prepare players for potentially problematic themes or trigger warnings during convention play or organized play? Because again, these are people that you probably haven't met before, so you don't know what their proclivities are.
Right. Well, first of all, you can ask. So you kind of like, I never expect anybody to actually tell me anything when I physically ask, are there anything that you're concerned about or trigger warnings or things that we should avoid? Because they probably don't want to tell or share that at that moment publicly. But you need to ask simply to set the tone that you're listening for it. And so you never expect an answer, but you ask anyway. And then you need anonymous tools, if possible. It's really easy on a VTT because you can set up a deck of cards or whatever that they can click on, and they can throw it out, and there's a visible sign that, hey, we got to jump ahead. And I use a 4-card deck with like an X card that says stop immediately and jump ahead, a fade to black card that's wrap up quickly, pause card because you might just need a break, but you want to continue, and then a play card, meaning that everything's good. You jump far enough. And so nothing needs to be communicated to me directly. When I'm playing on in virtual too, somebody can message you directly. So I always make sure that they know how to do that and that's available. In person, it gets a little trickier, but you can again use cards. You can and there's ways you can randomize things or to make it a little bit easier for everybody from that point of view too. When it's a 4-hour game, which is typically what you're doing in organized play or convention slots, it's either like 2 hours or 4 hours in those. You don't have time to go into a lot of detail. So you can't describe a cave-in and or other traumatic drowning experiences or something like that somebody might struggle with. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what you're saying essentially is there isn't enough time to really dig in detail anyway. So chances are, whatever it is, it's pretty much gone as soon as it's mentioned because you're on a train that's going somewhere.
Yeah. But in case somebody has a concern about vampires or something, and the whole session about vampires, that you got to deal with that. So.
Yeah, for me, it's spiders in the Underdark. Whenever we go into the Underdark, I'm like, please don't choose spiders. Please use something else. There's so many other horrible things down there. Please not spiders.
And that's the thing. As a GM, you're already trying to improvise and think up stuff on the fly. If somebody throws out a card on the spider, just change the monster.
Yeah.
Even if it's integral to the story, you can just put a different monster in there.
Now it's a snake.
Yeah.
Or a ghost or something else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, being quick on your feet is a good way to handle those kinds of things.
Right.
Any other things like that where you've had to quickly pivot on something?
Maybe sometimes a player getting a little bit too bogged down into their descriptions. Always that's where it's good to rely on your process, right? Don't get upset with the player. Just stick to your process. And so, we got to keep our time slots going. So I do need to move on. It's a good line I use. We need to keep up with our time here, but it's not about them then. And we can.
Yeah, exactly. It's not blaming them. It's just saying this is the status quo. That actually brings me very nicely to my next question. Any tips for time management at convention games? You've already said you have 4 hours, and chances are somebody is signed up for a class the minute your session ends, or they have to go somewhere else, or they go to a book signing or something.
Right.
Conventions are go, not just for you, but for your players.
Yeah, and even if you're doing virtual, if you're playing 7 to 10, people got to get up for work the next day or something like that. So you got to try to stick within the boundaries. First of all, one thing to do is if I see I'm running over, I try to ask people at least 45 minutes before the end, I'm going to need 15 more minutes, or I'm going to need a half hour more, and get a confirmation from everybody it's okay. And if not, you need to figure out something to cut. And the time, and that leads into time management tips. That battles can drag things out. So one of the interesting things that I've realized after playing a lot of games is that 3 rounds is about enough. You can go longer, and if you do it in waves, you can really have an interesting battle. I've done some of the hardcovers where the end chapter is just one big battle, and it's great to do that in a session like a convention session. But if you're running out of time and you need to wrap things up, once you're at the point where the players have gotten the advantage, you can say, "Hey, we're going to move ahead to keep up with our time. Here's what happens." Or the character with the last one in initiative after you go. So I usually try to go through a full round on the initiative, and the person that's last or the person that's first, I will say, and how does this battle end?
Oh,
You've
nice.
gotten the upper hand. How does the battle end?
So you invite them to do the cutscene, essentially.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great idea. So far we've got checking in with the players to see if you do have a little bit of wiggle room. We've got removing things that aren't important, which we talked about before, like okay, we can just pull that scene, we can just fast forward here. Reminding the players that you're on a time level, and also the idea of introducing cutscenes to move things forward, which I think is genius.
Yeah.
Any other time management tips?
With one of the things I found with Adventurers League, which is with Dungeons and Dragons, they have lots of random encounters, and they put too many. I mean, the whole idea is actually to put too many in. You don't need them all, and once you realize,
it makes it modular, essentially.
Right, and that way, everybody is playing ends and starts at the same place. They get the same storyline, but they have a unique experience. So you can pick and choose the random encounters you like. You don't have to do them all, and you can combine things. So the clearing in one of the ones I really liked was a clearing in the woods, and it was a trap because the flowers were poisonous when you walk through them. But there's also a hag hut at the end of that clearing, which was a totally separate random encounter, totally different place. But I put it all together, and so you walk up. You could potentially get poisoned. There's this nice inviting hut there with the door open. It's warm smelling biscuits, and yeah, it's a trap.
It's a trap with a trap.
Yeah. So you can mix and match things, combine stuff. You put your own twist on it. You're as a game master, you got to put your creative time into it too. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of prep because all these things are written out for you, but getting your brain around thinking like, well, what if I turn this upside down or twist it around? And it really gets fun to run things. And sometimes I've run the same game 5 or 6 times. So especially with the Radiant Citadel, there are some of the stories in that I've run. I think it was the Night Sea Sucker. I went 7 times with that one.
Wow. So
I got interesting ways to maneuver things around different parts of that and tell different stories. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And again, I think one of the I think I was interviewing Amanda Hammond about this, who works with Wizards of the Coast, and she was saying that essentially one of the things that you can do is if there's a trap in a room with some monsters, you can just have the monsters accidentally set off the trap, and then you walk into the room and they see the aftermath of this. So also, you don't have to push them through every encounter, even in a dungeon where they're going through every room. You can either pull it out, or you can trigger things or make them more obvious. Like with your flowers, for example, if you put a dead guy in the middle of the flowers, it's very obvious that they will walk around the edge of them. And then that makes them feel really clever, and then maybe they fall into the second trap.
Yeah, exactly. And it might be different the next time you play it and that or run it. And that's fun too.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of tips for time management, which I think are just great general GM tips. I love that. Let's talk about difficult players, because sometimes we do get difficult players at our table, even if they mean well. They don't necessarily mean to be difficult. How do you deal with difficult players when they are customers rather than friends? So at a convention play, if they've paid, at an organized play, if they're paying you as a GM, it's a slightly different relationship. Do you have experience on that?
Yeah. So I think setting expectations always is a critical thing with customers, right? So if you know that there's something that is going to be weak for that day, say it ahead of time. Don't telegraph things that general things, but if everybody has to start a half hour late because the previous session ran over and your players didn't show up for a half hour, just say we're going to be hustling through some of this stuff. And but for a player that maybe is being difficult at the table, where maybe they're having conflict with one of the other players or they're trying to steal their items, that type of thing. I will usually interject and say, okay, yes, give me that sleight of hand roll, but then have something, something happen that interferes with that. So you kind of like take it, guide it, and redirect it. If the sleight of hand roll goes off, but you weren't watching then the perimeter, and the party ends up in one of the random encounters that's in the adventure. So yeah. Or if somebody is kind of either bossing everybody around or telling them how to play, this is somebody that's experienced can slip into that a little bit too much. Like, you don't tell the person how to play, you just tell them what the options are. And sometimes it comes off too much as telling them how to play. So what you need to do there is actually call on players. And so the person that's either quiet or is a little bit intimidated about the moment, I'll call on them and say, here's a moment where I need to know what your character does. Yeah. And if that person's uncomfortable, you'll get a yes or no answer. And so it's part of this is you being mindful as you're going through the process and knowing, okay, that's not the other player being too over demanding. This player just doesn't want to like overdo it. And they might be having a perfectly good time. I've gotten feedback from people after games that they had a wonderful time and they said 2 words the whole time. So they're just there to roll dice. I actually got a message, talking about the safety tools. I got a message from somebody that said their dog had died earlier in the week and they didn't expect they would be doing too much.
Oh, goodness.
And then about halfway, and actually at one point we were in a tavern. To get through quickly, I was actually going around to each person, say, what do you do in the tavern? And who do you talk to? And just real quick, 5 minutes for each person. And that was actually sort of their introduction. Mm. And when I got to him, I knew that he may not want to do it. And he said, no, and I set up front that I have a random table I can roll in to just describe it, or you could role play it with me. And at the end, it was the last guy. He was, no, I'm just going to take the role. And so we did that. And then about halfway through, we ended up in a moment where we were in an observatory. He was a what is that? A star druid. And yeah. And he was that's my moment. He opened up and he was good to go after that. So it was a great moment to be aware of things because then he fit into the game better.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I think remembering different players take different amounts of time to warm up as well is another thing that
that's good.
is something that, so I've only run a very few games at conventions and they were very, very chill. This wasn't Gen Con, right? This was like D20C. And I had a similar experience where I had a very quiet player. And at the end, he said, it's the most fun he's ever had at a table. He has never laughed so hard. He's never had such an enjoyable D&D game. It was amazing. And I was so worried about him because he was quiet the whole time. Like, he was just giggling occasionally in his chair. And it's very hard to tell sometimes from the outside. So I think there's a little bit of like trust in yourself as well. Like sometimes the difficult players are not the loud ones. They're the quiet ones.
Right. Right. And balancing that, right? So it's looking at it both ways. That's very true.
Do you have any tips for spotlighting to do it in a way that feels seamless?
It's like spotlighting different characters.
Yeah, like spotlighting the players around the table.
It makes it easy when it. So one of the things that Kobold Press did is that we've been, as they're gearing up the organized play that they do, Kobold Chronicles, it's pre-generated characters. So everybody knows the character they're going in, and they have a list of like traits, and they even have like interactive things like you don't like this about the player, or a little bit more detailed than that. But and so players can automatically have things to kind of play off each other back and forth. So knowing in that situation, it worked well that I could know what the characters were, and I could plan ahead. I knew like there was things that would highlight each person. There was a horse in a field, and one of them was a mounted combatant. They didn't have a horse when they started. I was like, oh yeah, that horse is definitely going to be there. Yeah, and they took advantage of it. And they totally, in the final battle, it was their moment. because they control the battlefield. They're going 3 times as fast as everybody else, dropping people off, picking people up. So that having the virtual games, having that moment to like get the characters ahead of time, you can do that too. When you're in convention play, that's harder because you're just seeing it as you go. But that's where you really need that. You need that 15, 20 minutes where you let everybody do a character introduction. And you got to be processing in your head, oh, we're going to use that. And that's, I think, tying their character into the story is one of the best things. That's the most feedback I've gotten from people that say, you really tied my character into the story.
Do you have any specific tips from that, apart from just listening and listening analytically to player introductions? Because I think that's a really good tip. That's something that I don't do. And I think just writing down little notes being like, what's a shiny sword? Mounted combatant without horse. Like these are open hooks that you could like hook into a story. As a
right. So watching for, I guess is that like a sort of matchmaking in your head that you're doing? Trying to think of like what am I doing when I'm doing that? I think my brain is excited to find patterns that are there, and revealing them in moments. Like everybody always enjoys that about a story, like the twists and they don't expect it from their character. So anything you come up with that links their character to the story is a great piece. So, again, that self-confidence probably comes into play, but it doesn't take much. It can simply be a piece of paper on a table. It's a scribe, and they talk about how they're poor, and they don't, or a wizard, they don't even have first level, and they don't even have enough money to get a piece of parchment. Well, you put a piece of parchment on a table that they find somewhere in the adventure, and stuff like that. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I really like that. And we've all been there. Level 1 characters, man.
It's rough.
You just want to make bank so you can buy a shirt. Like sometimes it's not even epic.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about difficult players and the variety of difficult players and ways to deal with them. What other kinds of struggles do you face in convention play or in organized play that you don't have to think about in a home game?
Well, here's an interesting thing. I think because conventions, people are coming into play. They know that it's short. They know what they're doing generally. And even if they don't know how to play, they're a new player, they're there to play. So you don't get in the conventions trouble players that are like aggressive towards each other, right? You don't get that. You don't get people that are playing a different game than the people that are sitting at the table. But in a home game, you've got to watch out for, and honestly, I've had this happen to me even when I'm playing and I'm watching for it. But you get people that want to play a game in a certain way, and you are playing a different game. And so you got to have constant communication. When you're playing a long-term game, you almost got to have that same communication style that you do for one-shots. And it's easy to forget that, right? So like you end up with a player that wants to leave. So one time this happened to me. I was playing a paladin, and I wanted to do something, and the DM was like, "No, you paladin, you can't do that." But it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was more that in that moment it didn't fit with the story he was telling.
Yeah.
And it left me with a bad taste, and I didn't really want to play then, so I left that table. And it's like that's the kind of thing that'll happen if you're missing that. And if the person doesn't leave, they're going to try to move you to their process, and it becomes it's all miscommunication. It's not that anybody's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And so making sure that you're doing that long-term communication is a thing with the home game versus the conventions.
Yeah. So an example of that might be, for example, if the GM is trying to run an epic game, fighting dragons and gathering gold, and there's one player who just seems to want to do noir murder mystery. That's what they want to do. They just want to play a different kind of game. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. And that, honestly, that's the source of like a lot of confrontation. And it's the same thing. If somebody wants to be an evil character that steals things or fights the other players, it's really the same thing. They want to play a different kind of game. And as a GM, you could actually mix that in if you have the conversation with them and say, well, we need to balance that with what everybody else wants too. Yeah. thinking of Tabaxi Druids, I have the Players Weekly. They wanted to play this cat druid that was actually 5 different classes, total chaos. Oh yeah, it's the whole goal is how many cats can they summon?
Oh my god, he's trying to do the 9 lives thing. Yes. But just with 9 classes.
Yeah.
I love that.
And so like if you're a ranger, you can summon animals. If you're a druid, you can do all sorts of different things, conjuring stuff. And so they just kept taking classes they could conjure more cats. And
that's why he won. That's why it was chaos.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to herd cats.
Yes.
I love this so much. This gives me joy. I would allow it as a GM, but that's because I love chaos. Anyway, tell me what you did.
Which is why I thought, okay, this is great. But we got to tell everybody else it's like we can't go in like blind. And everybody else loved it too. And now they play into it, right? So like that gives the other players a chance to like bond with this player. And they're real good about giving other players their time too. But then we can really ramp up with like the random cat walking down the street that they're like, hey.
Hey dude, is that one of yours?
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my goodness. Players, man, just players. They have great ideas.
Yeah, they do. And that's they are great ideas, but you can say that that's not for my game, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And try not to be upset with the player, but and most conflicts coming from that. So even if they're really adamant and angry about it, that anger is not because of you. That's because they're really committed to their part. So I usually try to think about it that way and remind myself that they're just trying to do what they want to have fun with.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you handle things like bio breaks? Because you're sitting in a chair for 4 hours. I would need to go pee.
Yeah. Well, people need a break to just decompress a little bit sometimes. The 3 scene one-shots work well with this. Like a lot of times there's an hour or 2 of like investigation. So you do the introduction, you go to the place, you do the investigation, and then that's a good time to take a break. And when you're sitting for 4 hours, you should be getting up for 10 minutes anyway. So I usually with a 4-hour game, I take a 10-minute break in the middle. But whenever we're playing a game too, I usually tell people, please feel free to get up and go when you need to go. Because I think that people won't ask.
Yeah.
And so you got to say it up front. And I know that feeling. I wouldn't ask to go to the bathroom. And you make it through the whole day of school. When you're in high school, or you wait. Yeah. So you set a plan time, and then you say that, hey, feel free to take a break. And again, you can set the expectation. Like if you're in combat, do your turn and then go.
Yeah.
So you give them some examples whenever you're setting something like that. And these are all things like for a mini session 0 right at the beginning. It doesn't have to take a long time. You can have a spiel that you come up with for 5 minutes that kind of lines these things up and really gets you moving.
Nice. Yeah. That's a really, really good way of handling it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the play part of organized play. Let's talk about what happens once the game finishes.
Okay.
Do you ask for feedback from your players after conventional organized play? Is that something you build into the time?
On my own games, I usually have a little decompress time, and that's a good thing. So when I'm playtesting, I usually like ask a few questions at the end, and then I'll follow up. Sometimes I follow it up with an actual survey. For convention games, there's usually not enough time.
Yeah.
In person, but the virtual games for the Adventure League games, they actually the group I work with actually does a survey for every game.
Nice.
And so my end spiel is, here's your Adventure League rewards, and we go through like what you need to record, and then please fill out the survey. The first question is a safety tool. Please fill out the rest of the questions from there.
Yeah.
So.
That's a really good idea. What kind of when you're just doing it yourself, what kind of questions do you ask for feedback? Like, what is your do you have like a standard array of questions, or does it change from game to game?
Yeah, I think it does change a little bit. Sometimes I want to find out different things. But for me, it's when it's especially when it's on playtesting, it's about things like, did everything make sense? Were you confused at any parts? Did your character feel this was meaningful? That's a good one. So like asking kind of specific things that relate to the playtest. When I'm just asking for feedback in general, I try to phrase it more as a debrief, right? Let them like exhale a little bit at the end. And I didn't realize that's actually another safety tool. Like you should actually give people a little bit of time at the end just to breathe and like get back to like the real world. So as I'm learning more,
overrated.
Yeah. As I'm learning more, I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense because you're so amped up. Like I'll run a game from like 8 to midnight, and you can't get to sleep. So just 10 minutes to be like, hey, we did a good job. How do you feel about that? And real general questions in that moment. When I do the playtesting, I'm asking real specific things, but otherwise it's just like real general.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what kind of post-game information do you share with your players? Like you personally, do you send them somewhere? Do you encourage them to go check out your Patreon? Like how do you manage all of that?
Right. Well, as a sage with World Anvil, I have learned that I cannot make that ask too big, right? You got to step by step let people learn a little bit about you. So I put one of my social media contacts on there, and then I also encourage people to join my Discord because I do all my game scheduling and updates in the Discord too. So it's almost like you want a reliable place that you can talk with your regular customers, and generally that's like a newsletter or someplace that is yours, right? You can't do that on general social media. So Discord works well for that, or an email newsletter. So those would be the two things that I would put in. Maybe a social media contact for somebody that's like wants less of a connection, but somebody that's really excited about playing games with you. You want that newsletter list or Discord or something.
Yeah, absolutely. George there was referring, by the way, to the fact that for our sages, we do sage seminars, and we help them with the business of becoming a business, the process of marketing, the process of sharing, and all of that stuff. So that's what George talked about. A little bit cryptic there, so I did just want to explain that.
Oh, sorry.
We do monthly seminars, and one of the things we always say is, you can't meet somebody and then just say, buy my book as the second sentence. Like that. Right. That's not how people work. You can't do that. That's not classy. They're going to leave you. They're going to go away. So yeah, yes. Exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
So the seminars have been useful. I've put it in place, and I think that and when somebody comes back to your table a second time, like Gen Con a year, I did virtual Gen Con twice now, and the second time a group from Canada found me again, and then last summer for Father's Day they emailed me and said, hey, can you put on a game for one of the guys? It's for Father's Day. So I just did a random game like that too. So like that was very exciting. And that just by sharing my info and just having it available, I didn't put a pitch in. I just shared what I was doing. And that was good. So that's fun. Just, good communication, let them know that you're doing this and you'd love to have them back. And
I love that. That's a really good, honest way of doing it, like a really authentic way of doing it. Just like, hey, I'm me. If you want to find me and do more of this, I am here.
Yep.
So you mentioned World Anvil already, and that you use World Anvil for bits and pieces of this process. How do you use World Anvil for convention play and organized play? Like, how does that fit in for you?
So for organized play, you're playing a session that was pre-written by somebody. So I don't use as much of World Anvil for those, but for my notes, sometimes what I'll do, I need when you're running a game, and especially if you only have a few days to like get the module and like to read it and digest it, I read it, do nothing with it for a day, then go back to it, and I open up World Anvil, put it into an article, keep it in draft mode, and actually summarize it in the way that I want to play the game. And just using the simple H1, H2, H3 for headers and different sections, and putting a table of contents on the side, it is faster to jump through that once you reorganize everything than to use like the tools inside some of the games. And that just makes it quicker, because I have a habit of saying, oh, let me scroll back up to that when I use a PDF. Yeah. And that's not very efficient.
I hate running games off PDFs. I hate it. It makes me crazy. I'd rather have interconnected pages any day.
Right. So that's one of the, when it's a one shot, that's super easy to do. So I often don't do that. When it's one of my games, like I just ran last Saturday, I did a live stream, and we had to keep it within 3 hours, which is shorter than my normal time. And it's one of my games, so I want to do everything. To keep it in that time frame, I did the mini session 0 ahead.
Yeah.
And so I linked to, I wrote short stories 3 weeks ahead of the game. And so I had links to send to the players. Nice. So they had all this background ahead leading into it. And then we didn't have to tell them, oh, you're in Etonia and this is what's happening in the city. They already know, and they knew it in Storyfort.
So they actually read it, as opposed to giving a player a wiki page where they just don't read it.
Right. Yeah. So I did flash fiction. It's short, 500 words, and has a couple pictures in it, and it's all good to go. And I've done that with some of my one shots that I've played in some of the organized play events, where I one of them is Mr. Thorngage Manor, and it's halflings that are there. Well, I have an article that describes all the things those halflings did that are public, right? Like that are known, that the general people would know in the world, and because they were kind of famous. And when you come to this place then and you start finding the things, you're like, oh, I know what else is gonna happen. So like you give that player that actually reads it like extra knowledge. And so you gotta tell like who didn't read it then and who did. And if they didn't, that's fine too. But if they did, that player gets a highlight, and everybody's like, oh, you know this, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it rewards them for being invested in the game and being invested in the world, which is a really good thing to do if you want people to be invested in your game and world.
Right. And then they come back and they play again. Last week I had one player, so two of my home game players were in the live stream, and a third player that I've just played a couple times with. I gave her information that relates back to our home game, and she just shared it randomly in the session. The other two players, their faces were priceless because they're like, oh. So that was fun. And it wasn't for like anything public; it was just for internal.
No, just makes a player feel smart, which is sometimes just amusement engine itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a little bit backwards. Now we've talked about how to run, how to prepare for your game, how to run through your game, and tips and tricks for that, and what to do after your game for convention play or organized play. Now I want to talk about how you can get into running games for organized play or convention play, because I think a lot of people in the audience right now, and a lot of people in the audience in the future, are eager to make this leap. They've GM'd a whole bunch. They know what they're doing. Now they want to do it either in a more serious capacity or professionally. How can they make that leap?
Yeah. So there's always a need for a GM. So you can go to your local gaming store. Oftentimes they will have a connection to Adventurers League or some of these other organized play systems. You can go online. The yawningportal.com is or not .com, but it's yawningportal.wizards.com, I think. That is the organized play for D&D. The community page on the Kobold Press website is their organized play page. So it's look around online, finding places that are doing organized play, maybe even knowing that the word organized play is what you need to search for, right? Is the thing.
Figuring out the search term is already a good start.
Yeah. And watching for when they make calls for they need DMs. And most of them tend to do a cycle of like every 6 months or every few months. They'll say, hey, we need a few more people because schedules get busy. DMs can't keep playing anymore, or GMs. So there's always an opportunity to kind of like fit into it. And I think once you find an opportunity, you got to be ready. So one of the things that I did is I watched a lot of actual plays, and also, because it was interesting to me, but also because it was a learning experience. And then any kind of like about the game system that you want to play in, any influencers that are doing things about that. And it was less important to know lore. So don't worry if you don't know everything about the Forgotten Realms or Midgard or whatever you're going into. Just because especially with these organized play, you're only doing a one shot. It only matters what's in that time slot. Yeah. So one of the things that I did is I made some connections with people online, and I saw that they were part of some of these organized play, and I asked them about it, and then they made sure I got the link, and I signed up. And when I did play, you want to go in prepared, ask questions, all the common things you would do as in any job, and try to be positive. Once you get through it, that big first hurdle in the fire, then they want you back.
There's an old adage in music, which is I used to be an opera singer, so you don't need to be the best. You just show up, you just do your job, you just be polite, and they will ask you back. Because what they want is people who aren't hard to work with and are competent.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when the first, as you come back a couple times, and those first people like that you played with, like when those first few games come back, and like, hey, I wanted to come back to your game. You're like, oh, now I made it.
Yeah. What I would say with convention play is often you can just sign up to run a game. So if there's a convention that you've got your eye on, go and see what the rules are, because often you can just sign up to run a game. Not necessarily a paid game, sometimes a paid game, depends on the convention. But even playing some free convention games to start with will give you parameters of what to expect. It will give you a laundry list, like a little bit of a CV, where you can say, okay, well, I've played these conventions, and now I'm ready for something a little bit more. I would also say follow, if you have systems you like, if you have companies you like, follow their socials. Make sure you're in their Facebook groups or whatever, because I know that the Midgard Kobold Facebook group was asking around for DMs for Gen Con at some point. They want people to play their games. They are looking for people. And if nothing else, you may get to get into the convention. They may or may not, depending on the company, be able to pay your airfare, be able to pay your hotel. There's perks in there that aren't necessarily paid games, and that may get you in with the right people as well. So I think you were talking about this earlier, George, but like it's really there are stepping stones, and just like being in the bottom steps is already the start of that. Like, don't expect to walk into a convention and be paid $1 million for running a game. That's not how it works. If you are interested in doing this, there are steps. Go out, speak to people, make friends, ask questions. You never know what might come of it.
Right. And it doesn't have to be, if you, I can be introverted. And it's funny that I'm running these games, right? But it's a small group. It's very intimate. So it works well for me. So even if you're not looking to blast everything out to every place, find the places that match you.
Yes.
And you're going to find success that way. Even if you just start showing up and aren't talking, you're going to see where you want to fit in, and then you go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. Samurai in the chat mentioned that Chaosium always have convention GMing recruitment, and they pay for your convention tickets. But double check on their website. Always do that, by the way. If you're listening to this from the future, details change all the time. And even now, we don't know everything. Go check the website. Go ask some questions.
Yeah,
that will give you more information.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll pay for hotel rooms. Some organizations will cover your hotel room, maybe some travel expenses. So you aren't necessarily going to get an hourly rate all the time, but if you're going to Gen Con anyway and you get paid for it, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So actually, we have a very insightful question from Kitoipo, who asks, do you ever run your own homebrew games at conventions? And what's the difference in satisfaction between that and official events for you?
Yeah. I've run Mr. Thorngage Manor at Adventure League events. It's not an Adventure League module, but they have it like in other category. And
Nice.
so I've run it, and thinking about my audience that I was running for, I was like, if we're going to run it like an Adventure League. So you got to create your character with the same rules. We're going to follow the same format. There's a starting point. There's an ending point. So I kind of like adjusted it for that audience, but otherwise it was great. And I was super excited because then that's when I really got to use, I had that, it was a virtual event. So I got to use all my World Anvil stuff ahead. So every character had I was so excited. All 6 characters had a different World Anvil page to go to because I had to work for all of them.
Nice. I love that. That's amazing. We've got a very open question here from Asa Mitaka, who asks, do you have any tips for RPG homebrew? Now, this is something I happen to know that you do a whole bunch of. So what are your top tips? If you could give 3 top tips for RPG homebrew, what would they be?
So I guess it's be a bit of a pantser. So you make a general plot, and then you see how chaotic you can get, because you'll uncover the big gems there. And so it's the second part of that piece. So letting the story with an RPG homebrew, you're not the only storyteller, right?
Yeah.
So remembering that, and that's where you got to let things go a little bit. But then the second piece of that is following up on those great ideas. So when that random NPC comes out, or the player comes up with a really cool trick that they do, why is that in your world? And what is the story behind it? And write that up. And then it's going to show up later at some point, and the players are going to just be amazed.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the tricks, in my opinion, to making your players believe you were Machiavellian and you were planning it all along is exactly what you said. Just like pay attention to something that somebody's introduced, or something small that you've introduced that they've taken notice of, and then just bring it back later. Be like, yes, it was important all along. The red-handled knife that I totally didn't make up on the moment because I didn't know what the guy had in his pockets.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and when you have random ideas, write it down. So it is also fun to trick the players, because some of them read my weekly short stories that I do, and it's all based on the same setting. And so they'll be like, "Oh, I saw you read about this a year ago. We're going to run into that." I was like, "I don't know. We might."
I think there's a bit of a... Oh, yeah. Of course, because you are Machiavellian. I think there's a bit of a misconception between homebrew and writing an entire campaign setting for somebody else to use. Like you are when you homebrew for your table, or even for your world, even to write adventures in, you're not necessarily writing the entire of Forgotten Realms or the entire of Galarium to support that. You only need the bits that you need. And if you're homebrewing just for your own table, sometimes you're just laying down track as you go. You don't know where this train is going. That's also okay.
Yeah. And it makes for a good game. My very first session, I planned an encounter where the party was supposed to get captured. They're level 1. They should get captured. They beat it. They came up with a crazy idea with a cart, and it was chaos. It was the cat's fault, but that's okay. But later on, I was able to use that same storyline. It was probably 6 months later, and they did get captured. I was like, this is what happens. They don't get, put in. They don't get killed. We go into this other storyline. So yeah. Amazing.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. Again, you just gotta just bring it back when it works.
Yeah.
Kitoipo says, "Gotta skin that cat." It sounds like a whole bundle full of chaos, but I am here for it. George, what's next for you? What's coming up? What are you working on now?
Well, so I'm taking some of the adventures that I've had, and I've made 10 one-shots.
Nice.
And I've gotten one of them published, and I've got 4 of them in editing. Well, one published, 1 in layout, and 3 in editing. And I have somebody helping with layout because I'm finding that some of these processes you can do a lot of it on your own, but some of it you just get bogged down in, and you gotta hand it off a little bit. So I got a layout person, and I'm gonna put all these out from my settings, so it'll be as a pack of one shots that you can play in Wildlands. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool.
Yep.
Well, guys, that is all we have time for today. A couple of reminders. I'd like to remind you that the homework is due. Yes, summer camp is on, as you may have noticed by our ukulele and beach themed entry for today's live stream. This month we are getting prepped for summer camp, which is our July challenge. In July, we're going to challenge you 32 world building prompts or thereabouts. And I cannot wait to see what you guys do. We have been revealing our themes week by week. Week 1 was power. Week 2 was frontiers and liminal spaces. So those things between political borders, geographical borders, all that kind of good stuff. Metaphorical borders, like the frontier of space. I'm really, really excited to see what you're all going to do with this. We've had a geography one, we've had a cultural one. We're going to be revealing another prompt tomorrow, guys. So let's see what that could possibly be. And in the meantime, that link there that I have shared, that is the homework. So if you haven't caught up yet, that is the place where you can optionally get yourself and the world prepared for July for this mammoth event. George, are you going to be taking part in summer camp this year?
Absolutely. I did not do the homework yet, though.
That's okay. As I say, the homework is optional. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Essentially, we do reveal the themes week by week, and we try and give you a chance to prepare for them if you want to. We also talk a little bit about the features that might help you in that area. So when we're talking about frontiers, like, political regions that touch each other, like, Germany next to France, for example, would be, a political frontier. These are great moments to start looking at things like interactive maps, where you can track where the borders are, this kind of stuff. And we have a little bit of extra credit for season worlds as well. So we've got an older world that maybe needs a little bit of organization and love. We've got some hints and tips there too. We'll be releasing the new homework tomorrow, so guys, come and join us for that. We also have the return of the Dimmy missions. Yes, we have 15 shiny missions from Dimitris, CTO and co-founder of World Anvil, and my personal favorite world building bean and husband. He is going to, for a lucky 15, be looking through your world and giving you personalized missions of little areas that he thinks it would be great to invest some time in world building. All of that's coming tomorrow, guys. So it only remains for me to thank George. George, thank you so much for coming to join us today. Yeah. You're amazing, bean.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
It's always a pleasure. I love talking to George. George came to meet us at our meetup in Washington, and it was so awesome that I just, every time now I get a chance, I'm like, let's get George on the stream. And of course, thank you everyone in the chat for being here today, asking your wonderful questions, and generally being great company. You guys are awesome. We're going on a raid. We're raiding Lore Hammering. They are Anvilites. They are playing Warhammer. And yes, they literally wrote the book. Andy Law is running Fantasy Warhammer. He is responsible for writing large swathes of it. This is something that should not be missed. A man with so much energy, it's literally coming out of his ears. And just an overall sweet bean. So stick around and shout out, light up the forge, even if it's just for a minute or two, to let him know that we sent him, and share some of that Anvilite love. And I will see you guys tomorrow for a very special homework stream. In the meantime, guys, you know what to do. Grab your hammer, go world build. See you soon, guys. Bye.